你是说下面那个书？
hash brown, probably not your
现在好像有在动。
everyday choice. Probably
我听一下 YouTube。
a choice that's a healthy choice that can teach children to eat more vegetables.
Other reasons why you might think this is a middle-class family or not? Yeah, so my guess would also be that they were a middle-class family because there's been a lot of research on kind of social class differences in parenting, in behaviors, and going back to Bourdieu, Bernstein, other theorists and sociologists. In general, they found that working class families tend to emphasize more conformity, so more rule following. They also state rules more clearly to their kids, also in schools. They have a rigid use of space and time. That means this room is for this purpose. At this time, we eat. We don't play with the car, the table, as this little boy was doing. We don't get out of our seat and go to the other room and then come back in. And strict role relations. So parents are in the adult category, so they're the authority figures. And children are in the children category, and they play with each other. It's not as much kind of interaction between them in a more egalitarian way. So, like you saw, but if you look at the middle class side, middle class families tend to give their children more freedom, more autonomy. They emphasize creativity more, and they have a more flexible use of time and space, and they have more person-centered versus position-centered role relationships. So here you can see this idea of catering to the child, right? It's what do you want, as an individual? Do you want the strawberries? Oh, you don't want the strawberries? Do you want the Pop-Tart? Do you want the juice? It's not just saying, okay, this is breakfast food, we expect you to eat it. If we're going to try to cater to your needs. And you also see that, even at age 3, Daniel is very comfortable kind of asserting what he wants and doesn't want, to his parents. So you see that more equal relationship even between a young child and their parent. So from all this research, we would guess that this family is a middle-class family. But this family is actually a working-class family. And this trend, which I kept seeing as I was observing these data, is kind of what this study is about, looking at these kind of blurred social class boundaries that I was observing in this family. So before I go there, my work itself, my research overall is looking at schools and families and how they socialize children into what Bourdieu would call the habitus, and different ways of kind of acting in the world, being in the world. So my first book, which was mentioned, I spent about 18 months inside an urban charter school. So this is a school type in America that serves low-income students, working-class students, and this model has been very successful in getting them to achieve academically and getting these kids into college who typically wouldn't get into college. And what's notable about this method or these schools is they use pretty strict disciplinary methods. They may not be strict by Taiwan standards, but by American standards, they are, very strict. And they use a approach called sweating the small stuff, where kids are sort of monitored for very kind of minor behaviors throughout the day. And so what this book looks like, that even though they're trying to promote social mobility for these kids, the school ends up reinforcing these working class skills because of their strict and rigid standards. So I looked through the attitudes students are learning in that school, the kinds of skills, and the interactional styles they develop. So I'm happy to talk more about that book later on if you're interested. But today's talk is looking at younger children in their families. So originally when I did the dissertation work for that book, I wanted to do a homeschool comparison. I'm kind of interested in the links between home and school. But, you know, as you when you do your own dissertation, you have an ambitious idea, and sometimes you end up narrowing it based on what's practical and how many years you want to stay in school. And so I ended up not doing a home component for that study. So this one turns to the home, and it turns to younger children as Bourdieu argues our kind of dispositions are established quite early. So, and he argues they're durable over time. So our families really contribute to the way we kind of see the world, move in the world, and it's not always easy to change that, although not impossible. We also know from other disciplines outside of sociology that these early years are really important for children's development. So it's a critical time of brain development. Jim Heckman, the economist, argues that interventions that are done in the first 2 to 3 years of children's lives are much more cost-effective than those done later on. There's a lot of research that shows differences in children's abilities emerge very early before kindergarten, and those skills they have at kindergarten are very predictive of many outcomes in the long term. Employment, education, behaviors, and so on. So it argues for attention to these earlier years, which sociologists have tended not to focus as much on. How are we doing? Are we following okay? Yeah? Okay. Great. So there's been a lot of research on parenting, but there we go. There's been a lot of research on parenting, but this tends to be outside of the field of sociology. So psychologists have done the most work on parenting of young children. But psychologists who study parenting tend to study something very specific. Like they measure a very specific parenting behavior, harsh discipline, or parents' vocabulary or syntax, and they link it to a particular child outcome, right? Number of words spoken, externalizing behavior. So they're more interested in identifying what behaviors that parents can do that are linked to positive child development measures. We as sociologists, I think, are more interested in the culture of parenting. We're not uninterested in outcomes, but more about kind of the process of parenting and how it's connected to culture, context, class. So moving into sort of the sociocultural, sociological literatures, in the sociocultural field, we do see more research that looks at parenting as patterned and influenced and shaped by one's context. These studies tend to focus on, specific groups, cultural groups, like Mexican mothers, and trying to understand what are their particular, parenting styles and norms that they use. And they also emphasize kind of funds of knowledge, like what are these families bringing to their children that's kind of unique and that can help these children as they navigate the world. In sociology, I think my read of the literature is that most of it has been on social class and social class differences in parenting, and that is where I kind of follow in my own line of work as well. And we have a lot of work kind of on middle class, professional, kind of intensive parenting. In terms of kind of ethnographic work in sociology on parenting, there is very little. So I think it's an area, where there could be a lot of good work done. I think you all probably know Annette LaRose's study of unequal childhoods. So this work was done in the early 90s, and she and her students followed 12 American families for 3 weeks in their homes, and each of these families had an 8 to 10-year-old child. And what she found was that social class really did define these two different parenting styles. So the working class families followed what she called natural growth, where they kind of, let their kids be, they provided for their basic needs, they made sure they were fed, but then they kind of let them out on their own. Whereas the middle-class families, this may be more familiar, engage in concerted cultivation. And this is the idea, is that parents are actively trying to cultivate, develop their children's skills and talents. So with 8 to 10-year-old children, this looked like parents enrolling their children in lots of extracurricular activities, chauffeuring them to lots of places, having kind of negotiations with them in terms of developing their language use and their assertiveness, and so on. And she found that that was a very kind of time and labor-intensive strategy. This one on the right side, the Fast Forward family, Eleanor Oakes and her team out at UCLA in the 2000s, they video recorded 32 families for 2 weekdays and a weekend. And these families were all families that were professional families where both parents worked. So they were interested in what is it like to kind of, for a dual earner family, what's life like for them. And so they collected 1,500 hours of video data, and again, kind of older children here. There's been a slew of papers that have come out of that project, and this is the book. Eleanor Oakes is an anthropologist, so it has kind of that twist to it. So the study where these data come from are the New Jersey Family Study. And this is Tom Espenshade. He was on my committee at Princeton. He's now retired. Actually, was a demographer, so this was a very different kind of last project that he did. But I say it's an old project because I started this my first year of graduate school, so many, many years ago. But now, he has since retired, so I've taken over the project. So I'm now directing it, and we are trying to get these data out to share with other researchers who might find the data useful. But what we did is between kind of 2017 and 2019, we recorded 21 families, each with a young child between the ages of 2 to 4 in their families for a 2-week period. And we collected a huge amount of data, 11,470 hours. The cameras were basically left on. So I don't know if I have a slide of that. I can get there. So first, to recruit families, we just went to places where we thought you would find young children. So preschools, library story times, shopping malls, things like that. Then we did a series of interviews, surveys, to get to know these families better, and basically included anybody. It took a while to recruit them. Basically included anybody who kind of added variation to our sample, went through all the steps, and was still interested in participating. We gave each family $500 for participating. And they participated for different reasons. More of the lower income families were for the money, but some also wanted to kind of show off their parenting skills or just wanted to learn about children's development. And so the video recordings were done kind of at all different times, so they weren't all done together because we only had 2 sets of video cameras. And they were on kind of those, like poles, basically. So we recorded up to kind of 4 rooms in a house where parent-child interactions occurred regularly. And we put up to kind of 2 cameras in each room. So kind of 8 cameras per house. And they were kind of, left kind of hanging on the ceiling. And in some families, those cameras were left on all day. In some families, we left them on from kind of 7 a.m. to when, the kids went to sleep, something like that, and not through the night. And where we are now is trying to get these data in order. What I'm going to show you is qualitative ethnographic, video ethnographic. But what we're trying to do right now is to use kind of AI to try to tag the data so it can be more useful to researchers, because it's very time intensive to do anything with these data, as I found in doing this project. Even to find meal times takes, a semester for one family just to find those meal times for one of my students to do that. And AI can do it in, 30 seconds. So we've been working with Google and to try to see what we can do. So we're in the process of seeing, can we use some of these tools to at least tag the data so we know, okay, this is where the child is, this is where play is, this is where mealtime is, to facilitate the research process. These are just examples of some of the little recruitment material we use. We have little postcards we sent out. This is a Facebook post on a mom's group. And then these are the 21 study families. So I really wanted them divided by social class because of my own interests. So our first round of recruiting, we actually got, I think, all middle-class families. So then we had to more intentionally go out to recruit working class and poor families. But we basically, divide them in the sample. We don't have many Latino families, although a few fall in the multiracial bucket, because one of the criteria we had on the interest survey asked them, do you speak English primarily in the home? So we selected on that. Okay, and because you are recording inside people's homes, there were a number of measures that we put in place to try to protect families' privacy. Including we did not record in parents' bedrooms or in bathrooms. We gave them these stop signs, so if there was something they didn't want us to see, they would hold up that stop sign, and we said we would delete kind of 10 minutes, before and after that stop sign. We also gave them a little voice recorder for the same reason. If there's anything you want to say or tell us or want to delete us to delete later, you can put that in that voice recorder. We had to get consent, informed consent, not only for the family members, but of course people who might visit the house as well as unexpected visitors. So we put basically a sheet on the door. So when someone came to the door, they could see, oh, a study is taking place. If you walk in the door, you have consented to participate in the study. And then what we did have, this was in New Jersey, so New Jersey law, we do have to report any child abuse or neglect. So we let families know that. Okay, so the cameras were motion activated, so they only went off when there was motion. So this means we have lots of little clips. Actually, the average length of a clip is only 1.5 minutes, because you have people just kind of going in and out of rooms, a lot, or just quick kind of motions. You wouldn't think. There's some longer ones, but a lot of very quick, a dog runs in and out of the room, the camera goes on, the camera goes off. So it's a lot to work with. I call this my albatross from, I don't know if you know this poem, but it's like I call this project my burden, kind of, because it's video-ethnography was new to me, and dealing with all this data science is new to me, so I feel it will be a happy day when I get all these data curated and shared, so I can keep going and leave this project behind. This is just a little bit about what I talked about making this shareable database. Because these data are sensitive, they currently live in Princeton in this thing. There's like a very secure computer that's not connected to the internet. So that's where they live. And we connect to them through a remote desktop. So you can't, do anything in the cloud and all these things. This makes everything very difficult when the data live here. But we are working on trying to make data accessible, working on data agreements, and like I said, trying to identify individuals' behaviors and speech so other people can start using the data. Things like Whisper are not very good with these data because it's young children, it's everyday noise. Actually, your typical video tagging software that even Google uses is not very good at identifying just basic things. They've been used for like YouTube videos, which are very different than like videos of a home. So ChatGPT is much better, but Google used all these normal video algorithms they have, and they were not very good at actually identifying almost anything. So yeah, so it's been difficult to try to figure out how to move forward with curating these data. But that's another thing. Moving to this project, so what I did is started to do some research with these data, because I'm a researcher, not just here to, tag and share the data. So I took a video-ethnographic method because as an ethnographer, I'm interested in everyday interactions, what we can understand about social class and culture and parenting by watching these videos. So I started by thinking, okay, well, as an ethnographer, I want to know everything that's happening in a day, so we started with making these logs. That's what kind of video researchers do, to just say, like, who's there, what are they doing, what time is it, what room are they in? But that took so long. I said, I'm never going to get a paper written. So we then decided, okay, let's just pick an activity that it's across all these families. So we ended up on mealtime. That was something we saw. I thought it would be a little bit easier to find meal times because, they might be around the same time of day. It might be breakfast, lunch, dinner. It turned out like families actually, it's a little bit difficult. You're actually watching a lot of the videos because they have very extended meal times. They have lots of snacks. So it's not that clear that we save that much time. But we did end up focusing on mealtime. So we logged all parent-child interactions around mealtimes. Then we started writing more in-depth descriptive accounts about what happened in mealtimes, just like an ethnographer would write field notes, memos, and then started making a matrix with themes where we were pulling out kind of codes, and then what are the patterns we see in a particular family, the example, and doing this kind of across all families. So it's a very qualitative, inductive approach. Although we did have these kind of 3 general categories that the literature found kind of relate to middle-class parenting. So this idea of individuality that I talked about at the beginning, we treat kids as individuals, not as members of a group, so we're catering to a child's needs or preferences. This idea of informality, we relate to children in a less rigid way, more egalitarian, and flexibility, this idea of bending rules and expectations, not giving that many consequences. Okay. So I will move to the findings. So what we basically found is that there were four types of families. We found that 2 fit what kind of sociologists have found in the past. So you can see 12 of our 21 families basically fit these traditional patterns. And these are just some demographics about the family. So we have the child-centered traditional middle class and the role-centered traditional working class families. But then what was kind of interesting to us is we had these 2 family types that didn't seem to match what we had found in the literature. So the first one we found were like the Jackson family I read to you at the beginning. These are these working class families that seem to use really middle class styles. And we found 6 of those. And then as we kept going, we also found these middle class families. That's what we were going to write the paper on. But then we're like, what are these other people, these middle class families that seem to use more working class styles? So we're like, maybe there's actually 4 types here. So I'm going to talk about these last 2 types because the traditional types we know about from LaRoe and others. Okay. Or maybe I am going to talk about them. I thought I wasn't. But I do have them in here, so I guess I will. Okay, so the Cohens are, this is a traditional, I'll start with the traditional middle-class family, child center. The Cohens are a white family. They have 3 kids. The parents are in their 40s, and both are working professionals. So this family, they were having some friends over. So before the friends came over, the parents wanted to give the kids something to eat. So they have 3 kids, so they wanted to give them some Chinese food. But the kids, didn't want the Chinese food. The little one, pushed it away. So mom said, okay, you don't have to eat it. Daddy will give you yogurt in a little bit. The girl takes a couple bites of yogurt, and then she's done. Okay, so now the guests come, the guests leave, and mom now comes to check in on the kids after the guests have left. She goes, okay, does anybody need anything to eat? Rachel, who's the little one, hoisting herself onto an armchair, immediately answered in a squeal, me! Mom replied, what do you need? And walked to the kitchen before Rachel could respond. Rachel slid off the chair and headed towards the kitchen, mumbling, I need some what, Mom interrupted, talking to Rachel in the other room while putting things away in a kitchen drawer. Walking into the kitchen, Rachel repeated the word some and eventually settled on some mac and cheese. Rachel came over to Mom, leaned her hands on a step stool, and repeated clearly, can I have some mac and cheese, Mom? Mom looked at her and replied, yes. Opening the fridge, Mom then called to Rachel's sister. Do you want some of this soup from yesterday? Her sister called back, yes, please. Mom then called out to Rachel's brother, do you want anything? What do we have? What do we have, he asked. Mom answered a little more brusquely, that's it, just some leftovers. Do you want anything, yes or no? Do you want eggs? He responded, I will have eggs. As she walked over to the stove to prep the food, Mom clarified, okay, what kind of eggs? Scrambled, you mean? So in this family, already it's a hectic day. They already had guests over, but Mom is still willing to prepare 3 separate meals for the 3 separate kids, depending on their preferences. And not only for the last one, who wants eggs, she's also willing to, prepare them however he would like those eggs. Do you want them scrambled? Do you want them, fried? Whatever it is. So here we see, children treated in a way that their learning that their personal preferences are important and that they are going to be catered to by their family. So that's kind of in line with what prior research has found. An example of a traditional working class family are the Otieno's. They are a black working class immigrant family where the parents are from Kenya. In addition to the mom and dad, there are 5 children in the household. They also have an uncle and a cousin and an aunt who are often in the household as well. And in this family, everybody eats the same food, and everyone is supposed to eat the food as well. Whereas in a lot of the other families, you see the kids not eating much of what they've been served. So this is at breakfast on a Saturday. The older children and the 2 adults sat at a long rectangular wooden table for breakfast. The children seated next to each other in white plastic booster seats. The 2 adults sitting at the heads of the table spoke to each other in Swahili, while the children at the table looked between them but did not speak. Near the table, the aunt was carrying 2-year-old Layla. She put her down and took a chapati from the cake dish in the center of the table and tried to feed a piece to Layla. The aunt then sat down at the table with Layla still on her hip and continued to feed her while talking with the uncle. Layla did not speak or respond even when the uncle reached his hand out to her for a handshake. So in this family, only the adults at the table basically are speaking during dinner. The children kind of sit quietly. They're really only speak when they're spoken to, and sometimes don't even speak when they're spoken to. So this is a kind of more hierarchical, more rigid working class family. Okay. Now we're going to move, oh, sorry, I didn't change it. This is the Cohens with their 3 kids, and this is the Otianos. Okay. So this third category are these working class families that look to me like middle class families because they're catering to their kids. They're offering lots of choices, like we saw in that first example of what to eat. And as was said earlier, that may not be a cost-effective strategy for a working class family. They're negotiating with their kids. They prioritize the kids' needs above their own. They use few directives, which are kind of like eat this. That's like a directive, like a command. Nor do they use many consequences, and they seem to bend rules and expectations. So the Jones is a working class black family. There is, the mother is a single mom, and she lives with her grandmother, and she works, the mother works like at a party store. So this is a Tuesday morning, and Jada is having some breakfast, about to go to preschool. Mom has made her some oatmeal.
Mom, sitting at the kitchen table, put a spoonful of oatmeal in front of Jada, offering it to her. Jada replied by shaking her head and mumbling, "Mm-mm." Mom asked her if she was not hungry, if she just wanted some animal crackers. Jada left the kitchen. Mom asked Jada if she was ready for school, and Jada whined no. Mom instructed Jada to come and put her shoes on, repeating her statement twice. After there was no response, Mom started to scroll through her phone. Eventually, Mom called out to Jada and begged her to come on and put on her shoes. She then looked up and asked, "What is that?" Jada then walked back to the kitchen with a large bag of Skinny Pop popcorn, nearly her size. Mom asked, "What is that, popcorn? You want some popcorn? Come here." Jada silently handed her mom the bag of popcorn, and Mom opened it. Jada excitedly jumped up and down, reached her hand towards the open bag. Mom told Jada that she needed to eat her oatmeal first, just a little, and then she could take the popcorn to school. Jada started to protest. Mom responded to her protest and said that if she didn't eat a bite of oatmeal, Jada couldn't have the popcorn. Jada then ate a bite of oatmeal. Once she did, Mom poured popcorn into a bowl. Jada took the bowl and started to eat the popcorn while standing next to Mom. So in this case, again, we see, even though the mom had already made this oatmeal, she decides, okay, if the girl doesn't want it, you can have animal crackers, or the girl, fine, grabs this big blob of popcorn, you can have the popcorn and eat it, catering and acquiescing to what the daughter wants. In this family, it's interesting. You can see that the girl is, this little 3-year-old girl is even starting to develop what Leroux calls this kind of sense of entitlement. So like I mentioned, Jada and her grandmother live with the mother, and there's this one video where the mother is calling. So the grandmother's talking to the mother on the phone, and the mother's going to go to the store to go shopping. And Jada says, "Oh, I want to talk to her mom." And she says, "Mom, I want cookies. Can you get me cookies?" And the mom has said, "Okay, what kind of cookies do you want?" And she says, "All right, I'll get them for you." And then the grandma, in a much more kind of deferential way, says, "Oh, if we're taking orders, then I'll have some cheese and chips." So even, this is a household where there's food scarcity. There's actually not a lot of money in the household. So the grandmother herself, because the mother is the one with the job, is like a little reluctant to, ask for what she wants. But the 3-year-old child feels very comfortable, having been raised kind of, in what I would call a more middle-class way, where your needs are met. We're going to attend to, what you want and give you choices for what you have. Okay, so that's another example of that. So the last thing is these middle-class families who adopt these working-class approaches. So here we see, instead of this catering to the child, we see these families actually hold pretty firm. They don't offer their kids choices. They say, this is what you're going to have. You're not going to get this. They don't back down. The expectations are really clear. They actually use more directives and even threaten consequences. So we're trying to figure out, kind of what's going on with this group. Okay, so these are the Wilsons. They're a professional class white family, and they have 3 children. Charlie is nearly 4. So one afternoon, Charlie comes home from preschool. He's playing upstairs. Then he goes downstairs, and he wants a peach. Charlie walked from the living room where the news is playing into the kitchen and quietly told Mom, "I want to eat some." She dismissively replied, "No, you don't need any. I'm just going to put it here if anybody wants one." Mom and Charlie walked out of the kitchen. Mom is carrying a tray of fruit that she sets down on the dining room table. "I want to eat," he continued. "No," Mom repeated. Mom headed back to the kitchen, and Charlie laid face down on one of the chairs and began to whine. "Fine, I want Mommy, I want peach. I want peach. I want peach." Mom continued to walk around the kitchen, unfazed by his whining. She replied, "Nope." Almost under his breath, Charlie repeated over and over again, his voice gradually getting louder. "I want peach. I want peach. I want a peach. I need a peach. I want a peach." His voice mixes with the background noise of the news playing on the TV. Mom again insisted no. Yeah, he's like on the, it's funny to watch the video, he's like lying across the chairs, and he starts like throwing a tantrum with, "I want peach." But she doesn't bend, right? So unlike that family we just saw, who says, "Oh, sure, have a peach," or "You want this, you want that?" The mom is very clear, you're not getting the peach, you don't have the peach. There's another family where it's kind of like the same thing, like no snacks before dinner, and they are insistent and they won't let the child have the snack. So in these families, despite the kids pushing back, there's no negotiation with them. And in the case of this other family, they even, give the girl like a timeout and give her a consequence. Okay, so what does this all mean? So thinking about, why are we seeing these differences? Looking at those working class families who are showing middle class norms, one could just be diffusion, right? Of these middle class practices to a broader set of families. We see that with a lot of practices diffuse from the middle class to the working class. Now that parenting information is very readily accessible online. It's easy to kind of hear, oh, this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be talking with our kids and negotiating and catering to them, so we can see these norms diffusing. And there have been some studies that show that too. Patrick Ishizuka does some survey experimental work, finding that working class families they kind of subscribe, if you ask them, to that same kind of concerted cultivation belief as middle class families. There's also survey work showing that middle class families are spending less time on intensive parenting now, outsourcing more of that work, and working class families are spending more. So I think we may just be seeing some of those differences in trends. Another one is this could be a reaction against kind of, at least in the US, I don't know if it's here, there's been some pushback against sort of this intensive parenting model, this helicopter model where you are doing everything for your kids and then your kids become adults and they can't do anything for themselves. So it could be more intentional, and that second one in particular is referring to those middle-class families that are using more kind of working-class styles. They may be kind of reacting against this overly entitled style. We may be seeing differences with young children. A lot of these studies have looked at older children, so maybe parenting just looks a little bit different with younger children. Or I think the one, that if I were to, I think all of these things are probably happening, but the last one is the one that maybe some of these differences are just less stark, and that there's greater within-class heterogeneity than maybe we have previously recognized. LaRoe herself kind of admits some of that in her work, and others have said, is it really differences in values or is it just differences in resources? And of course, as we know, there are other factors, gender, ethnicity, immigrant status, that also intersect with social class that can lead to more heterogeneity in parenting practices. So we can certainly be seeing some of that too. With a very small sample, it's kind of hard to say what is driving these findings. I think what we're doing here is more just identifying, again, greater heterogeneity across social class types. So why might this be interesting? One thing is I think this idea of inconsistent cultural logic. So the idea of class-based cultural logic is that it's coherent. It kind of goes together and it works. So, someone in a working class family might have been taught to follow rules because they work at jobs, right? Or their families work at jobs where that's what's expected, to follow rules, to be expedient. If you start acting like the boss, maybe you're going to get fired. So you want to act deferential to authority. So it's consistent. So what happens now when the logic is now less consistent? If working class kids are learning to be very entitled, what are the implications of that? For example, even for resources, as we talked about, right? You may have families that aren't able to give children lots of different options, that aren't able to waste food, and yet now we have this happening, right, in these families. So thinking a little bit about the implications of these inconsistent logics. Another one is thinking about concerted cultivation, and this came out of that second type of middle-class family using working-class styles. So, this idea that I think some people have gotten from the LaRoe work is that, what's beneficial is asking your kids lots of questions and negotiating with them. But maybe it's not always beneficial. I've written a paper with one of my students where we review literature on entitlement in psychology and sociology. And in psychology, actually, the research on entitlement is much more negative than in sociology. In sociology, we generally think about the benefits that entitlement brings kids because they get more resources, more opportunities, more attention. But in sociology, psychology, they see it as a way of like avoiding responsibility for yourself, blaming other people for your failures. So, yeah, I think thinking a little bit about what we think is beneficial about concerted cultivation and what isn't, and that maybe if you think about that, those families at the end, they are actually trying to do concerted cultivation, I think. That's why they're kind of harsher. I think they want their kids to learn these healthy habits and routines, like don't have a snack, before dinner, or eat healthy food, so they're a little bit more strict than you might expect. So in some ways, they still fit Lareau's idea of concerted cultivation, but they don't have that same kind of egalitarian back and forth that we've come to sort of couple together with that. So I don't know, I think it's worth thinking a little bit about what we mean by concerted cultivation and what forms that takes. And then finally, I think just thinking about what is shared, what are class cultural repertoires. If we are seeing all this blurring, what can we say about, parenting differences across social class? Is it more to do with the ease, for example, in which families are able to implement these methods? If everybody's trying them, but maybe one group is more nimble at doing them or has more time and resources to do them, or what is it then that still divides or still leads to inequalities? Okay, I think that is all. Yeah, I have. So I am happy to, answer any questions about the method, the study, the talk, or anything else that would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Golann's wonderful presentation. I think the content is amazing. Yeah, like the NJ family project. Wow, it's hard to imagine that happened in Taiwan. Yeah, and a great resource of research. Yeah, and I think the presentation is very thought-provoking. So I believe there is a lot of questions among you. So if you, I already saw, like.
Hey, thank you so much. I really enjoy the stories. I do have some questions regarding the concepts. I feel that the concerted cultivation, intensive parenting for middle class, flexibility is part of it, definitely. But then there are other aspects, within the concept. The examples that you gave just now make me feel that it's more like permissiveness. So in psychology, permissiveness actually is not advised. And if, for a middle-class parent who are expert-guided, as informed by the intensive mothering literature, right, that we are expert-guided and we are guided by psychologists, who argue that actually we shouldn't be too permissive to our kids. Whatever they want, just give it to them, or maybe you just ask a why question, and then you give it to them. This is simply permissiveness. And so I wouldn't say that this is squarely fit into the concerted cultivation, or even like the intensive parenting kind of context. So this is my first response. The second one is that you had an example about the kid is a working class family, and then the grandmother came and then asked for the kid wants more food, right? Well, I don't know what food, but then the parent just give whatever, and for that I would say that for a middle class family, a more middle class way I would say is to use more elaborative questions. Well, you have eaten something already. Why do you want more? And then when the kid explained, and then the parents would probably, if the middle class would explain to the kid that actually in our family, we do not have a lot of food. Look at our fridge. And then do more kind of explanation, because I'm more like, I'm super intensive, you know, in my parenting. So that would probably be something that I would do, because my kids always ask for more. And then I just teach him the concept of what is the need, what is more, what is luxury, whether you know, that kind of conversation. So I just wonder, like, when you put those things into categories, I wonder how useful is it, you know, and how do you converse with the literature of, you know, the previous studies, whether it is in psychology or in sociology? Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And I think psychologists have they have 4 parenting types, and I think it's much closer to what we're seeing than I feel sociologists have. Yeah, because they have the permissive, they don't divide it by class, but they have this, more permissive style that I think we are, versus the authoritative. And I think if you're looking at these 2 types of middle-class families, I think you could put one, more in permissive and one more in authoritative. Whereas the traditional working-class family might be the authoritarian, and then they have one more style, which is not coming to me. But yeah, they have 4. The concerted cultivation question is exactly what we're thinking about right now. So we're actually revising this paper right now. It's been under review, and the feedback we got was basically this one, that whether we should revise the framing, because it's framed a lot around Leroux, and wondering whether, like, these categories are Leroux, right? Or, these are broader categories, I think, from that first slide I had with working class, middle class. I've been reading back, you know, I am on vacation, a little work, mostly vacation, but I brought this book with me, Facing Social Class. I don't know if any of you have seen it. It was by Susan Fisk, who's a psychologist. It's an edited volume, a Russell Sage edited volume, and it's all about pieces about interaction, social class differences in interaction. So I've been reading that, and I think those differences that fit these categories are in the literature much more beyond Leroux. You know, this idea of, egalitarianism, you know, versus more rigid relationships, flexibility versus conformity. Those are in lots of studies beyond Leroux. And I think that's what we're seeing, that doesn't feel exactly like, it's not just permissiveness, I think this idea of catering to your kids, like, you could do that I guess you could say that's permissive, but you don't have to be permissive and cater to your kids, right? So I think that's the broader literature that we're talking to. So I think we are going to reframe the paper to be more there and less in the concerted cultivation literature. But trying to figure out where the concerted cultivation literature fits is where we currently are, because Leroux's got these categories, because it fits somewhere. I just can't quite figure out where it fits, because she looks at language use, interventions in institutions, and like extracurricular activities. I think those are her 3 categories. And language use is this idea of the negotiations and the explanations, as you're saying. So more elaborated language use. The extracurriculars we don't see here because these are very young kids, but it would be the same idea, I think, as like trying to develop healthy eating habits in children. That would be an example that we see, I don't have in this talk, but that would be an example of, I think, this idea of concerted cultivation. Like, what are you trying to cultivate in these kids, like these healthy eating habits? And again, we don't really see this intervention in institutions. So like a lot of we don't really have her 3 categories here with these data, but I do think her sense of when she defines somewhere concerted cultivation, she talks about customization. That it's the idea of learning to customize interactions to your benefit. And I think we do see that here, right? These kids are learning to kind of, or their parents are enabling them to, their parents are customizing interactions to the children's benefit. So I think these kids are learning that. It looks different than what Leroux, has studied, but I do think it's still part of the story. So trying to figure out how to tell the broader story. So we don't get the Leroux pushback that we have gotten now from both reviewers, and that you've noticed as well in hearing it, while not just kind of dropping Leroux, is something I'm currently trying to figure out. So I appreciate that comment. And then with the working class example, yeah, I think you're right there. So I think in our analysis we can sort of note what feels different, but what maybe feels similar and still kind of working class in that example. So thank you for that.
Hey, thank you for sharing. I have two questions. One is that out of different determinants of parenting styles, I'm more thinking in the quantitative terms, like how big is class has to do with parenting style. Is class taking up the predominant role in determining the choices or parenting style, or other factors are actually more like determining the style choices? And the second is that I'm not sure whether I missed in your presentation that in your study, do you also engage in in-depth interview? So in that case, you can cross-check your observation with their subjective narrative of how they interpret their parenting choices and styles. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know quantitatively, but it's a good thing to look into what would be sort of a stronger predictor, class versus, race, gender, immigrant status. I feel like psychologists who have done most of this work don't include those variables as much, when they're predicting things, So most of the studies are just parenting behavior, child outcome, not what predicts parenting behavior or what moderates parenting behavior on child outcome, as we do in sociology, right, with race, class, gender, and these different factors. Certainly, I think sociologists have hearkened on social class more than these other factors in looking at parenting. Like Leroux's book, she says that class trumps race. So she finds similar patterns between, I think she only had black and white families, but she finds similar patterns between black and white families in the same social class grouping. That said, we certainly know there are differences by, say, ethnicity, immigrant status in parenting behaviors, and her sample just, maybe didn't have that variation to look at. Gender, we've looked. There are gender differences in parenting behaviors. Certainly, we've seen those in this sample. A little bit in terms of the permissiveness, authoritativeness of parents. I would say, yeah, most parents in the sample are of the same kind of social class background, but there's a couple differences. And Jessie Schreiber at Duke has done, her first book was on cross-class marriages, and she found that the social class of origin did a lot to predict, those behaviors even after the marriage. So I guess in that case, class also trumps sort of gender roles there too. But I don't know quantitatively. I think it would be a very good study if it hasn't been done to see if there's a way to measure, which of the factors would be stronger. And the second question was interviews. We did do interviews. The interviews, were done, they were kind of a set interview. So they weren't done, I would say, like in coordination with the video. I think what would have been ideal is to do the video, show them parts of the video, and have them reflect back on what they're seeing and interpreting that for us. Logistically, we just didn't have the capacity to do that, so we just had a set of interviews. We did one set kind of prior to the videotaping that asked about just structural factors, and then the one post-interview asked about parenting values and behaviors, because we didn't want them to sort of reflect on that and have that impact, what we might see through the video. So we do ask some scenarios, like, as well as values. Like, what are the most, this is a list of values. Which do you think are most important for your child? So we have some things and some scenarios. Like, if your child threw a tantrum in a grocery store, what would you do? But it's not kind of one-to-one, right, with the video. So we can, there's some things we can infer, but we can't say, in this situation, this is what they were thinking, something like that. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your interesting talk. I'm learn a lot from that. I have a question, like how you categorize the social class. What kind of factor do you considering? Because I'm thinking that perhaps the blurring category is because the different dimension of social class, like their income might be categorized as working class, but they have higher education levels, so they may provide more flexibility to their children. And also, like how you think about the more and more middle class right now, perhaps it's related to the working class, but using the middle class parenting style, because perhaps we need to revise the traditional categories of working class and middle class. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that is, that's a central aspect, right? How are we defining class? And where did it go? Just show the chart with some of the numbers. We followed the row and followed the sociological literature in kind of not just dividing social class by income, but looking at occupation and education primarily. So looking at if they had high school education or less as working class, college or more as middle class, and then we had several questions about occupation and asking them, does your occupation, do require you to supervise anybody, or the kinds of skills, a more managerial position we characterized as more middle class. We had a couple that we were unsure of, like this LPN, this licensed practical nurse, which you're that's a pretty high-paying job. So I was like, oh, is that middle class? Is that still working class? So that one I looked at some articles, how, and it seemed like sociologists tended to classify that still as working class. But that is one family where they were using that. That was the Jackson family at the beginning that was showing more middle class things. The mother was actually studying to become a nurse. So if she was a nurse, not a licensed practical nurse, if she was an RN, she would have been in kind of the middle class bucket. So that is a family that may be sort of upwardly mobile. The father there was had a more traditional, working class position. But yes, there are definitely, we tried to look at, things like, because we asked questions about social class of origin. We did a couple tests around social class to try to see, is it because of mobility? Is it because of some other factors? And we didn't find anything that really stuck out there. But there are some families that have high income, but are working class, and vice versa. Low income, but middle class, because one family in particular, they reported a very low income, but maybe that's the, it doesn't look like 100 to 200. But she was, the husband was working class, but the wife was an acupuncturist, so she had sort of a higher education degree, so she ended up in the middle class. So there's a little fuzziness in some of these families, for sure. But we tried to kind of look through and see, were there any patterns that could explain some of this blurring? And there was nothing as a pattern kind of stood out to us as we did some of those checks. Yeah.
So thank you so much, Joanne, for the wonderful presentation. Definitely made me reflect a lot on my own parenting styles. And so very stimulating. Which type am I? I will save that question. So I have two questions. So number one is on the, because your data focuses on mealtime. So I wonder whether the meal choices, the food choices make an impact, will be an important factor in your story. Because I'm trying to connect the topic to the literature I'm familiar with in food studies and consumptions. I think it's quite, I think there is strong evidence showing that working class parents tend to offer kids more, I would say, unhealthy choices, not because of they don't know, but because they feel like these are one of the ways they can provide, I don't know, instant gratification, happiness to kids immediately, right? So when I hear about the story on popcorns, I feel like, oh, maybe that's, it doesn't cost too much, right? So maybe that's one way of, I agree with the permissiveness point. So it's not about making kids feel entitled. It's feel like under resource constraint, this is a thing they can offer. So it's still a class-based explanation, but not so much on the parenting style, but it's more about the food choice. And so on the other way, so for middle class, it's very strict because this thing is not good for you. So you shouldn't eat this, right? So that will be my reading to the Coens and who's the last one? Anyway, so that's the first question. The second question is, when I teach LaRue in my introductory class, I always feel it captures something, but I also, in my own experience, I feel like the parenting, it's a dynamic process and adjusts over time. So I wonder whether age makes a big difference in your story. I think teaching 2-year-old or 5-year-old and 10-year-old are very different things. So 2-year-olds, it's no way to communicate. So you just make them to eat whatever they can eat, right? So it's a very different strategy. When you're 10 years old, you reason with them, right? So, but I don't think the natural growth versus concerted cultivation really capture that evolution of parenting style, but because your data is very rich, and I think in the Jackson story, it's the youngest, the parents are most lenient to the youngest. Like whatever you do, you take it, but it's more strict to the older ones. So whether that makes a difference in the story. These are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I like the idea of the treat. I hadn't thought about that one. So yeah, there's an example in that family, the cookies run out, and the girl, that's what she's asking the mom to get, more cookies. So had she asked for something else, I don't know, would the mother still have gotten it? I don't know necessarily. So I think that's an interesting angle to think about. Is it just, the kind of what you said, instant gratification treat in that case? I would say across families. So in another paper I'm working on with a student, it's just like about how the modern family eats, and it's fragmented. The kind of themes we're finding there is sort of fragmentation across. It's not about social class differences because it's across all families. There's a lot of fragmentation in terms of who's eating. Very few families are eating together, and there are convenience foods across all families almost, and even the home-cooked foods are convenience foods. It's like spaghetti or the burrito bowl, So there does seem to be, it doesn't seem to be a defining difference across social class in terms of, the healthier foods versus the kind of quick convenience foods. We'll probably see more convenience foods. We do see more convenience foods in the working class families in terms of like the microwavable soup or something like that. But it's really across all of them, as you saw even with that other family with the eggs, the mac and cheese. These are all just kind of quick, easy, kid-friendly foods. The dynamic question, and age. We do have, because we do have siblings, yeah, we do see some parenting differences between younger and older children. There is, and I sort of thought to myself, which way would the parents go? Like, they could be stricter with younger children, or they could be more permissive with younger children, or they could be more intentional with younger children because they're trying to set norms, or they could be less, right? So it wasn't clear to me which way it would go, but in one family, the family that was most obvious was a working class family where there was a young girl, and the mother treated her in a very middle-class way. And then there was an older brother who was quite a bit older, and she treated him very much in a working-class, directive way. So that was, you know, an interesting difference there. In the other families, it was less noticeable. So thinking about, yeah, the question of what does concerted cultivation look like at age 3? I think it's a good one to kind of reflect on. One thing we didn't do, like we were thinking we could write a paper just on concerted cultivation, and that would look more at the content of sort of what's talked about, which we didn't look at here. So it certainly starts by age 3. There are parents like, you know, the one that did have the traditional meal, you know, they are asking the kid about daycare. What did you learn in daycare today? Oh, you learned about, I'm going to say Mozart because I forgot who it was. Mozart? Oh, we're going to go, I think it was jazz. We're going to go play that on the radio for you now. Yeah, so extending the learning, drawing out the learning, teaching a kid how to use a fork correctly, how to eat correctly, and why that's important. When you go to a restaurant, you need to know that. So you certainly see those kinds of behaviors, yeah, starting at age 3. But those, yeah, weren't the focus here. So I think it goes back to this initial question of like, are we looking at concerted cultivation in this paper or not? And if so, how? What do we think we would be looking for? Yeah, I think is where we are currently thinking.
Thank you, Professor. My question is not about your study. My question is, we know that the current U.S. Federal government has shut down the Ministry of Education. So what is the real effect on American society and like university?
Oh, big question.
Thank you.
So yeah, the Department of Education, which it's not closed, but they've cut, you know, a lot of the staff, including almost all the education research staff at the Department of Education. So that has, you know, very serious implications. So things like the data sets that most of my students use that are federally run, that collect statistics on students and schools for many years, you basically can't, they're not right now, I don't know, will they collect those data next year? If there's nobody to run those surveys, they may not be collecting those data. So that has implications there. You know, I just sat on a dissertation defense where the first chapter wasn't done because it was this federal data that's under restricted use. And so, well, we have the restricted use data in our closet, but you're supposed to get it approved, right? Like after you use it, you're supposed to like send them your paper, and there's nobody there to send a paper to, so the student didn't want to take that risk. So certainly, certainly the data there. The other side of that, of course, is the grants, which is the cuts to, some grants have been cut completely. So I have colleagues, as you probably know, you know, the USAID grants, so anyone who does research under that, those grants have been cut. Some of the education, not all of the education grants have been cut, so I have colleagues who continue to have their grants, but certain schools grants, like you may have heard of Columbia's grants were cut, so one of my colleagues was working with collaborators, so that grant fell under Columbia, so that was cut, immediately. So that project is, you just can't do anything. And then the indirects, right, those are kind of go back and forth because there have been lawsuits, So with the indirects, they still say, just keep them at what they were. You don't have to cut them to 15%. So I think a lot of universities are in a bit of a waiting kind of game, feeling it out, right? So the big impacts haven't hit the universities yet, but they are anticipating reduced grant funding. Grant funding at Vanderbilt is about a third of the money that comes in. It's about a third tuition, but it's a third grant funding, and a third endowment. And the other thing Trump is looking to do is tax endowments. So these are huge hits to universities in the U.S. If grants, indirects, endowments all get hit, then universities are going to get hit. Right now, I think we're just, and international students, right? I mean, that's tuition money. So at Vanderbilt, we are just starting to see some of those impacts. There haven't been significant shifts yet. My department didn't admit any new graduate students this year. There have been, some people who haven't, promotions have been looked at more carefully. Renewals for faculty have been looked at more carefully. We aren't hiring any adjuncts this next year. Class sizes are being looked at more carefully. So all these kinds of things, I think people are nervous about the financial implications and are starting to think about what will we do should all these things change. That's what I'm seeing right now. Did that help? Yeah.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pull it back to your research again. So just to say that Annette started Unequal Childhoods by trying to understand their food choices and dining stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, clearly that did not take on the direction she wanted, so it became a totally different book. But she did start trying to look at food.
Interesting.
But I thought that in your data, the most interesting part, of course, as you said, was the blurring of the class lines there. And it's a good near half of all of your data right here. It's 9 out of 21. But it's a little difficult when we want to turn it into a category because it's so much nuance. And this got me thinking about Halley's America's Working Man. That was a book that looked at how the blue-collar workers and their middle-class managers lived in the same place, how they socialized, and he found out that other than income, they were very much having the same lifestyle. They went to the same places, did the same what is that called, leisure activities. They cared about the same things. They lived in the same residential areas. And so I think that book was really challenging the idea of class-based differences as being as distinct as we usually think it is. And he went a little far. He went to say that it's not a working class, it's a working man. So I was wondering if this might be related to your work in saying that it's not the working class or the middle class type of parenting styles or logics, but it's just differences that are blurred, and that it's not that they're not class differences, it's just we have crystallized class differences to a point where we kind of don't understand and have a lack of awareness that there is a spectrum and most people will fall into the middle. And so I was wondering if that was part of the argument you were trying to make.
Yeah, I think that, back to the reviewers, is the direction they are asking us to go. And I think not quite, I like how, I'm not familiar with this book, so I like how, that's interesting, not class, but man, I mean, the idea of individual agency and reflexivity, I think is, I think it's interesting to think about. They were more pushing just, isn't this a story of class heterogeneity? Which I think it is a story of class heterogeneity, but I think, to the extent, right, how far do we want to go? I think it's the same question. Yeah, do we want to say, right, there's been an overemphasis on how social class shapes parenting behaviors. And in this day and age, given the interconnectedness and availability of information, like when Bernstein did his work, he was really talking about isolated social networks, you know, and that's why people could use a restricted code to communicate with each other. So in the society we live in now, maybe to that earlier question, maybe social class isn't the most significant kind of marker of parenting style.
Oh,
and
it is. I'm very much in that camp. Social class is the most interesting thing that we need to look at.
Right, we both study social class,
yes,
so we have
we're
to.
both about class. It's all about class. It's just not two distinctive groups. It's a spectrum, something like that. Yeah.
We won't throw the baby with the bathwater.
But I had another question about the methodology, and so I really like the idea of the video-ethnography. This is my first time looking at it. But since you have experience in both, could you talk a little bit about the pros and cons? And to my personal great fear is that if we can just video everything, why are there still ethnographers? Yeah. And so, like, how would these affect these like media or videos affect the outcome of our work?
Yeah.
So may I ask a follow-up question? I also have the same curiosity, and I also wonder if the self-selection effect happened in this study design. So some people, some working class family might want to sign in to perform. They understand very well how to, middle class parents their kids. So does that happen, or you observe a similar scenario happening in your study? Yeah.
Yeah, for that last question, we did check the reasons why people participated against these categories, and we didn't find it was, at least they didn't say, kind of the interest in parenting with the working class families. It was more the financial. Like, we didn't see the differences across categories for that one. But certainly there is selection of these families into the study. I think more actually on the middle class end than the working class, because most of those families we had to really recruit, and for financial reasons, many of them stated was a reason for participating. The middle class families, we had more who said, we think we're good parents, or we think our children are special, or things like that. Ethnographers, you can take heart, because my experience with the video ethnography actually made me want to go back to ethnography. So there are a lot of, I think, benefits from traditional ethnography that are difficult to capture in video ethnography. I could see it as a supplement, right, to ethnography. I think the main criticism of ethnography has been the validity one and the lone ethnographer, out in the field. So it's an advantage to have data you can return to with multiple eyes and different perspectives. I think that's very valuable. But what you don't get is it's fixed. The cameras don't even move, and you have what you've recorded, right? And it feels in many ways not like ethnography, because with ethnography, you're kind of going in and trying to figure out the story in video ethnography, almost as you would if you were data mining survey data or something like that, I think. Or you're going through qualitative, interview database. You're trying to figure out what's the story. Whereas for me, at least, as an ethnographer in the field, you are following the story as you go. You're kind of seeing, oh, this is interesting. Let me talk to this person about this hunch I'm seeing. Or let me, learn more about this. And you know a lot more about what someone was asking earlier about the interviews. You know a lot more. You don't know exactly what people are thinking, but you know a lot more just because you're talking to them in a everyday kind of manner, back and forth about kind of, what they're thinking about what they're doing. And you know a lot more about the context. I think here I feel that's a big restriction about how the context shapes parenting. I can't really see it. I have the few interview questions about their context. I can see a little bit of food scarcity, but I don't know enough, because you're not there in that home with them. and you haven't been there for, you know, a sustained amount of time. Now, there's a new project in Princeton, not new now. They just finished recording in Princeton. It's called 1KD. It's 1,000 days. And they've recorded, I forget how many families. Less than 20, but maybe 15 families over their child's first 1,000 days of life. So 3 years of data. So they are drowning in data. But that gives you a lot more context, right? If you're going to watch 3 years of data, well, you're going to see a lot, right? Whereas I only have 2 weeks here, but I can barely get through 2 weeks of data. So I don't know how they're going to get through. And actually, they're finding it very, very difficult to do anything with those data because it's just so massive. That's the other problem. It's so massive to process and to make sense of. Whereas being an ethnographer with your field notes, it constrains you, you know, to the data you can write down in your notebook. And you know that data because you were there. So yeah, they have even resorted to not even using the video in their data. They're just using the audio abstracts because they're psychologists interested in how children learn language. But of course, there's so much you could learn from gesture and context, but it's just too hard with so much data. So I do think, yeah, from this experience, that there's a lot that, yeah, video ethnography can't capture that an ethnographer can, and they actually feel quite different to me, the two kinds of work. But on the other hand, you know, I think how video has been used in education and sociology tends to be the micro-sociological. So that it's very good for. So if you're interested in, like, if you're an ethnomethodologist, if you're interested in how social order is created, if you're interested in, you know, what happens in an interaction? What happens in an interaction? Then I think you can't get better than video data, right? Because you've got it all right there, and you can look at it over and over again. So my education colleagues in teaching and learning, they use video data a lot, and they are writing a paper on, like, one clip, you know, 1 3-minute clip, where they are really digging in and understanding everything that's happening there. But that's quite different than the work of ethnography, where we're not going, like, so deep in one little instance. You know, we're trying to understand the everyday life much more broadly. So, like I said, it feels quite different, the kind of work. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the discussion is so rich and a lot of good comments and the back and forth discussion. But the time is up, so let's conclude our lecture. And thanks again, Dr. Golann's great presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Been...
And thanks all attending this talk. Yeah.
Yeah, especially
so
on your break.
Do we prepare some snack or? Yeah. So we have some outside, so you can stay for a longer time and enjoy it.